that we're going to be looking at is that data can't predict outcomes. And I know that we've already been skirting around this through earlier conversations. But, you know, by using data, we can create predictive models that can tell us which change activities accelerate the adoption of new processes, which leaders are perhaps better at leading change. We know that there are some that are great and that there are some that you really just don't want as your sponsor. Which areas of the business are potentially our early adopters, and maybe which employees are common resistors to change? What are some of our more ineffective communication channels that we wouldn't want to be using? Which leaders are anti-sponsors? And then lastly, what are the most effective training approaches? And those are just some of the things that data can tell us. And based on this, what are the outcomes that we can predict based on the information that we have? And there was a really interesting study that was done overseas for a store overseas. They're a retail store, and they conducted a study over the festive season, and they ran this study for about 3 weeks. And what they did was they actually used their security cameras, and they used their in-store security cameras to monitor traffic and movement of their customers around the store. And it was really interesting. They then took that data and they converted it into a heat map. And if you look at that, the visual, you'll see that in that heat map, there are areas that have got red and areas that are blue and green. The areas that are blue indicate low trafficked areas, where the areas that are red indicate your most trafficked areas within the store. And what was really interesting is what they then said was, well, what does this tell us about the store, and what does this tell us about our products? So the first thing was that they looked at their low-moving products or their slow-moving products, and they moved them. They moved them to the areas that they saw were high-trafficked areas as a way of boosting those product sales. Another thing that they looked at is, and that they realized, is that 98% of their customers turned right when they entered into the store. So that also helped them look at what they were going to place where, what they wanted front of mind, what was the most important. Another thing that was really important with this data is that they looked at their staffing and they said, okay, so where should our people be? Where are they most likely to be needed? Are they placed in the right location around the store? So it was really, really interesting that using this data, they were able to drive different types of outcomes. In a similar vein, many of us do change impact assessments as part of our role, and we can also use something as simple as a change impact assessment to visualize our different stakeholder groups that we need to engage as part of the work that we do. And by understanding who are our resistors, by understanding those stakeholders that are going to be the most impacted, it helps us to drive the right decision and the right action associated with it. So data visualization can be a really, really powerful tool that we can use in terms of making decisions and in terms of taking corrective action. So Ineshri, how have you used data to predict outcomes now and also for the future from an AB InBev perspective?
Okay. So going back to talking about resistance, I think it's very important as a change practitioner or manager that you actually understand your culture of your organization and understanding the culture of each group that you're deploying a certain project out to. So to give an example, we correlated a project where we had to transition people to a centralized space. And we had done a lot of data analysis in terms of how do people receive that typical project from a training perspective, from a communication. And we got a lot of data in terms of saying these are the resistance factors that existed amongst this group. So it's basically actually using all this data and collecting it and then using it for the next rollout. So when we use it for the next rollout, we actually could anticipate at this stakeholder group, this is what you are going to receive from them. So we were able to pre-plan and predict what would happen. And the second rollout went on much well, where we had very minimal resistance. And we were also able to see who those resistors were and tackle them on to become our champions for the change. So we reversed it. So we were able to predict our outcome by using our data from the previous deployments. And I think a lot of the time projects forget to actually sit down and go, let us do also lessons learned.
Yeah.
How do we go back and reflect? We're so excited for deploying and going live that we forget to reflect. And those reflections and data can assist tremendously when you actually deploy your future projects. So that is what we are striving to do more at ABN InBev in terms of actually understanding our stakeholder groups better, and we've got also country dynamics that we need to understand. So we're actually building now a portfolio of the types of cultures in the different countries and legislations and etc. So when we are dealing, we can anticipate the type of resistance or barriers we may anticipate for the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Aneshri. Ange, how have you identified corrective actions that needed to be taken in order to achieve desired outcomes?
So basically through our organizational readiness tracking, when we've actually gone and seen what the audience has adopted, very much what Aneshri is saying, versus what they're supposed to adopt, and based on that feedback, obviously come up with the contingency plans. But what we've actually designed now to help us with the FIC Amendment Act and the landing of that change, because our scope is so enormous across the whole bank, and we've got front office, middle office, back office. We've actually designed a dashboard that will pull through automatically from our detailed readiness plans. So Audience X has to complete training by the 3rd of October. They've got to have escalation processes in place by the 10th. They have to have done all their awareness in September, etc. And based on the adoption and the completion. So it's going back to the facts and what actually happens. We'll pull through and position that audience on our heat map. So with so many audiences to manage at a glance, we'll be able to see comparatively where we have to go in and do our intense change work to drive better adoption of change. So that's what we've planned. We've got to test it out still.
We still need to deploy.
And I also think, just to add to that, is don't think a vanilla approach is going to work for everyone.
Exactly.
So you got to streamline and tailor-make to different stakeholder groups.
Yeah. Samla, I know that you've got some data visualization ideas that you want to share in terms of how you've used it.
Yeah, maybe just a bit of background before we get to that slide. In Sasol, we don't have a program management office, like I understand in many areas, especially in the banks, you have. And we've always been craving for that, if you look at the whole portfolio of change. So what we run into, and Kobus that has done change management at Sasol can vouch for that. When you get out into a plant environment or to the mines, they tell you we're here to do production, and in recent years make sure that we actually do it safely. And those are the two top priorities for us. And all these changes coming from head office, we don't have time for that. And we're overloaded with change. We cannot do that. So what we've done is we utilize the ProSci portfolio change management toolkit just to visualize what is happening in the different business areas. So working with the change managers on the different projects, we look at when are you going to hit the business and how big is it and who's going to be affected. So we were able to start visualizing. Yes, there are 7 projects coming from head office. Now maybe that's a little bit it's too little. I think more in the direction of 50 or more. That are going to hit your business, but it's not going to affect everybody all the time. So you can visualize your stakeholder groups, you can visualize the disruption times that people will be affected and how big this impact is. Sometimes the impact, yes, it's a project and the change manager wants to drive a huge campaign, but it's not that intense. The impact is not that difficult. So you can visualize where the biggest leadership attention or sponsorship attention is required and when it happens. So that's the one thing that I found useful out of using those tools. The other thing, running with a portfolio, and this is an example just in a small area in the business, they had a process change, a system change, and 2 operating or business model changes where they looked at can we do this differently, linked to outsourcing, BEE, and all of those things. And we were able to, just by analyzing your sponsorship or your change management triangle, sponsorship, change management, and project management, against the investment being made and the people risk associated with that. We could show this picture. And immediately that ExCo that looked at this picture was able to say, but we definitely have an issue in terms of sponsorship. We need to beef that up, make sure that we play our role, and making sure that the project management and change management is also beefed up. So just by showing one picture, visualize that you change the conversation. There's been quite a bit of analysis at the back of that, but showing that picture really changed the way that they manage this process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Audience, do you have any questions?
Pauline from ConnectEQ. I just wanted to ask, I've forgotten, Anushree, how are you identifying and understanding the cultures in the 14 countries? Just as a matter of interest, what tool set are you using, process?
So definitely it is about actually observing. So you've got to be in country to actually understand from your engagement perspective. So we collate data in terms of saying, we know like for Mozambique, there's different culture aspects in terms of language. How do we, so when we are relating, so we're doing a lot of observation and collating some data around that. Also through the project that we're engaging in, from the different types of resistance that we get or barriers. We just start documenting. So we're starting to document that. And this is actually now going to become an ongoing project that we've just spoke about this week for them to actually start and build on. So it is about a lot of collecting data and visiting these countries and actually understanding what it is that makes them tick. So for instance, they don't prefer to have Zoom sessions. You've got to have face-to-face. So we've got to have to implement a train the trainer and contact people who are change champions in country to help give us feedback and say what is working, what is not working on the ground. So there's always, and let's not fool ourselves, there's always the challenge when you're working with the other countries because you're not physically there. But networking with the people in country and understanding them and building relationship and using and leveraging of your partners there helps us get the data of what we need to do from a change perspective.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Debbie?
So this isn't a question. I just wanted to share an example with you. Is we worked with an insurance company, and they were relocating 2,400 employees from around Joburg and Pretoria into one building. When we started, the first thing that we did was an analysis of the location of each of the employees, and we were able to plot that out on a map. We then did a study where we identified how many of the 2,400 employees were looking at getting alternative job opportunities because of the move and the distance they would have to travel from where they were, traveling to their old offices, now to the new offices. The findings were that we were going to have 25% attrition in that business, okay? So now talking about predicting outcomes, we went into the executive team and we said, 25% of your people are looking at leaving. Because we had done also the geographical analysis, we could tell them that they were mainly based in the West, Krugersdorp, and then Soweto and Alberton. Okay, so those were the primary areas. We worked with an amazing CEO because we were predicting the outcome. We were predicting the loss in productivity, the impact that that would have on business. He was incredible. He gave to every single employee a 10,000 Rand per annum increase on their salaries to help with travel. Okay? He also put in place a system where people could use transport that had been put in place for them. Plus, we spent a whole lot of time preparing for them costs on renting homes and apartments in the area, costs on schools, etc. in the area, so that it would make it easier for people if they wanted to move closer to the business to do that. We ended up with, I think it was a 7% attrition. Okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Versus, which is normal, which was the norm, versus this 25%. So we predicted the outcome. The beauty was, because we had the data, it moved the executives to action, and they were willing to support it. Okay.
And Debs, that also helped validate the case for our change and the case for having such a strong change management capability on the project, and also the investment that we were asking for. And they never said no to any of the initiatives that we wanted to put in place. They never said no. And I think what's great is having that 7% attrition at the end also reaffirmed that they'd made the right decision by having such an active and visible change management capability over that move. So how many of you have used data to predict outcomes? Okay, so we've got a couple of hands. How many of you partially? Like, yeah, could have maybe been a little bit better. And how many of you not yet, but you're going to? Yeah, there we go. Okay, fantastic. So definitely opportunities over there. And
Sorry, can I just
yes,
add something?
initially, please.
So I just want to share something. So data is amazing to have, but if it's incorrect, you've got a huge problem. So we've embarked on a process now on people data that was sitting at a 60% accuracy rate. We've just finished 9 countries to a rate of 98.57%, over 15,000 employees. So that data now is become like a diamond for us to also do stuff in our people function. So the data has to be correct. So keep that in mind when using your data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things that we can do? Look at gathering data over time. Look at finding good sources of data. Use comparative reference data where you can. Make sure that you visualize data. And that's one of the things that we really have been pushing very heavily within our organization, is how do we visualize and bring data to life and make it interesting and make it something that our stakeholders want to consume. They see it as a value add. And then also use technology to assist in gathering predictive data. And if we can start doing some of these things, then I really do think that we can say this myth is busted.